Hi, welcome back to Future Fast. And today we have a very special guest. And before I introduce the guest, for those of you who are here for the first time, this is an effort to bring people who are doing things that are bound to have an impact on the future. And the idea of these conversations are that can we take some pointers, tips that we can potentially use it in our business or life. So having said that, and please look up, we have almost 25 wonderful people who have shared their journey and experience and thoughts and their perspectives on future. And with that, today we have Dr. Jane. She's the chairperson for World Metaverse Council. And we'll hear her journey because she's had a great journey across healthcare to policy making to technology to technology evangelism, if I can say that, and the rest from her itself. Dr. Jane, welcome to Future Fast, and thank you so much for making time despite your travel schedules and the general busy schedule that you live in.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, Dr. Jane, can you please introduce and share your journey with us from starting the impact space? I think that's where you spent social space. That's where you started off your career, and policy making. I mean, it's something which people. It's very rare to find someone like you who travels across so many different things in life, and also at every stage, it's kind of impacting not just the present but also the future. So can you please share with our audience and listeners about your journey?
Yes, look, thank you. I think probably one of the most profound experiences I had in my life when I was about 16 years old, my mother took us to a Oxfam study tour of Indonesia. And we traveled around Indonesia and looked at all of their community-based projects. And in one place in Central Java, which is a very poor part of Indonesia, we met an Australian social worker who'd been working with the poor communities for 14 years. And I was just really amazed at what she'd been doing and what working with those communities had been able to achieve for them. And so I felt deeply moved to want to work, with poor communities in developing countries. So that was sort of my first inspiration for this whole idea of working in impact. And so as a result of that, I mean, I didn't really think about it a lot, but I thought, okay, I need to be that person. So I need to study community development and social work, and then I'm going to go and work somewhere, like Central Java and help these poor people. It was like a simple, youthful idea, but nevertheless, that's what I studied. And as soon as I graduated, I went to Indonesia as a volunteer, which is like a Peace Corps or the equivalent. And that was a big experience for me. I mean, partly because I was living in the middle of a huge, both poor and rich country, maybe a bit like India. I was living in a very small kampung with a family, and so I learned a lot of things about different cultures and ways of believing and so forth. But I learned too that just having an inspiration to help people didn't actually necessarily give you any of the skills you needed to help with, a kind of context where government drives what happens and the way communities are either rewarded or not rewarded and the way the economy grows. So really, if you want to achieve bigger things, you have to work at the sort of national government policy level. And then later on, I realized that, the global policy level was also important. So I went back to university to study a master's. I actually did public health, which was for no reason other than that was the one that accepted me. I mean, I have to tell the truth about this.
It was not your choice.
Public health. Yeah, but sometimes the choices get made for you. So I think sometimes, people look at your life and they think everything's been incredibly purposeful and you did this and you did that. But for me, I don't think so. I think it's more, you're always out there trying to move forward and things happen. You knock on doors, one opens. You don't pick the door that opens, but you walk through the door that opens. I think that's the truth of my life, just perennially knocking on doors and walking through the ones that open.
In India, we refer to it as karma. We tend to, when things happen not the way we intend to, we think, okay, this is karma taking me there.
Yeah, don't have a plan because often it just doesn't happen. So anyway, that just briefly, because it was sort of a long story. So I did a master's in public health. Through that, I was able to start working at national policy level. And then I started working with international agencies, was working with the Asian Development Bank in Manila. And this is a point I want people to think about. You don't always make a choice for you. Often you have other people to consider, like your family, your children's future, and so forth. And so at that point, I actually really loved the job I had, but I felt that I needed to take my children back to Australia to sort of bring them up so they had some identity or understood their culture. So I left that job, which I really liked, to go back to, create a better environment for my family at the time. And I got a job, which was Director of Women's Health in Queensland. And it was a really interesting job, and I learned a lot of things. But I really yearned to be working in international development, in other countries, in emerging markets. And so then I decided to set up my own company, which could win contracts and work back into emerging markets. And so I set up my own company, and we became, very successful in healthcare all around Asia and the Pacific. And
I'm just curious, what is it that you did, a study that kind of helped you in your entrepreneurial journey? Because it doesn't sound very linear to say that all that you did was just naturally that you become an entrepreneur.
No, I think I was always entrepreneurial, whether I had a business or not. I was always entrepreneurial in everything that I did. But in relation to the business, and I can tell you truthfully, I was an accidental business person. I never intended to have a business. I never wanted to have a business. But what happened was that as I said to you, I really wanted to work again in emerging economies and have an impact on the poor and that kind of thing. And I saw a tender coming up in the newspaper for a rural health project in Papua New Guinea, which is a kind of poor country to the north of Australia. And I thought, I can do that. I know how to do that. But I didn't have a contracting company. I didn't have any track record. So I went to the companies that normally tender on that kind of work. And I said, hey, look, I can write the tender for you. I can lead the team. I can win the work. I can do the project. But I don't want to work for you. I only want a joint venture. Because at least I had the brains to realize that I didn't want to be working for them. And so then they'd say, well, have you got a company? So I said, of course I've got a company. And then I ran out of the room, picked up the phone and rang up my accountant and said, how do I get a company? I need a company. So that's we joint ventured to tender on this project, and then we won the project. And then, then I heard of another one coming up in Samoa, and I said, oh, let's go to Samoa. That looks like a great place to go. And so it was really a bit of, kind of an adventure in a way, more than a business, just following our passion for working with poor people in emerging economies. And then at some point, obviously after a couple of years, I realized that I had a business and I had to have, human resources and quality and accounting and all of those things. So that was my rude awakening when I realized I had a business. But before then, I was just pursuing a passion and a mission.
All right. Well, in fact, it is very natural. In fact, that's what happens to most people who become entrepreneurs. That they don't plan to, and there are a lot of compliance things, people issues. So how did you cope with them?
Well, that was the bit that I didn't like. And in fact, in the end, although my business was very successful, the bigger it got and the more successful it got, the less I really enjoyed it, because what I loved was the working on the ground in the coalface with people. And so I was the head of this organization, and then I had layers of other people who were doing the work. So even though I think everyone thought I was incredibly successful and happy, I really wasn't. I mean, I was successful, but I wasn't loving what I was doing. And so I decided that, I wanted to move out from that. And the first step of moving out from that was to exit the company, which I sold to an American company, and then stayed on with them for 4 years because they wanted to grow their market in Asia and the Pacific. But it was the beginning of my road to freedom, if that's the word, because once you have a business, you're tied to it. There's no leaving it. You can't wake up one morning and go, oh, I think I want to resign from my business. It's just not like that. You have hundreds of people who rely on you to keep going.
Right.
So it's a big responsibility. But yeah, I mean, so briefly, I sold the company to an American company. I worked for them. And then during that period, I discovered blockchain, which connected me to this idea of social transformation and addressing some of the issues that I'd seen over many years of poverty, inequality, humanitarian disaster, financial inclusion, poor medical supply chains, all of these kinds of issues. And, blockchain just really resonated with me as a way that we were going to be able to overcome these barriers much more quickly than we ever could have before, particularly with the advent of mobile phones. So I got very excited about that, and I just decided that that's what I wanted to do in the next phase of my career, was really, follow the technology, understand it, find the projects that were doing the things that made a difference. And when I got the confidence that I was on the right track, then that's when I began speaking about it and writing about it and telling people that, this is really something that can change the world profoundly, and they need to pay attention to it.
How did the transition happen for you? Coming from developmental efforts, perhaps technology was a tool for you, right? Make a report, or like you said, write a grant application. But clearly, blockchain is nothing like this. So not necessary
No.
that you got into programming, but even to visualize applications of blockchain is an entirely different play, because I know people who are in the technology field for 12, 25, 30 years, and their understanding of blockchain is so limited. So how did you do
I
this
think that
transition?
bit wasn't difficult. I mean, it took me a while to figure it out. And, I went to my first blockchain hackathon in 2017, and that was my best learning experience ever, because I was still working for my company at the time. We gave the hackathon the problem, which was financial inclusion in Papua New Guinea, a country that has very, very low levels of financial inclusion. And we spent the whole weekend with developers and coders dreaming up how they could actually tackle this problem in a country with very low levels of mobile coverage, electricity, and so forth. And I learned a lot during that. It wasn't so much learning and understanding the technology. It took time, but I got that. It was then figuring out where I fit. Because in those days, this is 2017, the governments and the UN and the international agencies, they weren't interested in blockchain whatsoever. And so going and trying to tell my story of blockchain for social impact was actually pretty tough. And I quite often would get, sort of thrown out of people's offices, and people tell me never to come back talking about
So,
this
where,
blockchain nonsense. So yeah, it was hard. And then, and people thought I was a weirdo as well, because I was a bit older and I'm turning up at these conferences talking about blockchain for social impact. And I think they thought I was nice, but just a bit weird. So then I decided that, education was the key. So I acquired a blockchain fintech education conference company in London. And we ran London Fintech Week and London Blockchain Week. And I had a vision of, growing this to really be a place for thought leadership and education in blockchain and emerging technologies, which was a wonderful idea until the pandemic struck. When everything shut down, there were no conferences. That company was in London. My house was in Australia. So I scurried back to Australia when the borders were shut, and then got locked in Australia for 2 years. So that was not a happy period of time. And so I lost the company. Well, I deliberately closed it, but, the pandemic could have gone on for 5 years. You can't keep going with an events company that relies on
correct.
physical. So anyway, I closed it. And then try to kind of figure out what I did next, which was my experience during the pandemic. So I learned everything there was to learn about DeFi, and I wrote a book that was about the sum total of my pandemic contributions. Anyway, I think it's kind of like a long story, but you just got to take life as it comes to you, and then you have to make the best of it. And even if things aren't great, there's always something you can do. There's always, the sun comes up in the morning, you can find another place. And then I got sick of getting locked in Australia. And so I had a fight with the government, and I left and came to the Middle East, where I've been kind of based here since October 2020. And, that's been a wonderful thing for me, and opened up a lot of new possibilities and a lot of new contacts. And there's so many people here from every country, every culture, all optimistic and hopeful about technology, and all building and talking and imagining. So it's a very exciting time here.
Well, what's the title of your book? Is it available on Amazon?
Well, I've just done another one on Web3. The one that I wrote two actually during the pandemic, one which was about digital ethics, and the other one was more a personal journey, my blockchain journey. And then I'd done another one before the pandemic, which was blockchain and social transformation. So, I've done a few, but it's all trying to educate people and help them understand how this relates to them and their lives and their world.
Well, we'll share the links below this podcast, so all the listeners and audience, you can look up those books as well. Yes. So,
Thank you. But, people follow me on LinkedIn mostly. Most of the things I think are important get posted on LinkedIn, and that's free. So go the
yeah,
free
as
route.
well. LinkedIn link is also there, so please do follow the link and follow what Dr. Jane's up to. So, what is it that you're busy today, Dr. Jane?
Well, two things. One is the World Metaverse Council, which we established last year in October, which was really an idea that there was a vacuum in the metaverse space that allowed people who were working on it, thinking about it, whether they were developing it in sectors like health and education, or whether they were concerned about safety and regulation and standards and ethics, to bring people together so that we could all fast forward our thinking together. So like a global distributed think tank on metaverse. So we announced that, which was really just a good idea. And since then, we've grown already to have more than 1,000 people from 100 countries. And we have working groups on health, education, standards, arts and culture, entertainment, ethics, accreditation, and probably some things that I haven't remembered. And it's a wonderfully vibrant, active community of people, all of whom that believe the metaverse is going to add value to our lives, and all of us are wanting to share information to help shape it so that we get the best result possible.
Wonderful. Dr. Jin, thank you so much for sharing your journey and what you're basically doing, which is very promising, because I am a little familiar with that. I'm also in touch with some of the folks who are a part of your council, and likewise, in fact, Loretta's third part of the podcast has gone live today. So thank you so much, and for the listeners and audience, I hope this has been very interesting, and also you'll find better insights as you look into those links shared below, and also follow Dr. Jane, and do come back soon, because we're going to have more such things. Thank you so much.